Good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. It is our job as deal scouts to go out, find cool deals, report it back into you, and then share the story and the journey of the fellow deal makers so we could learn together. All right. So we've talked ranging from lemonade stands to SPACs and kind of all sorts of deals in between that. And excited to talk today with David Walters, who has an incredible mustache, and he's going to share he's going to share his story with us and some of the things that he does to help businesses. David, welcome to the show.
Josh, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you have a great mustache, but you also have an interesting accent. What's the origin of that accent?
I tell people it's my East Texas accent, but it's about 3,000 miles east of Texas. So I'm from the UK originally.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you?
Sure. Okay. I started my career as a weapons engineer in nuclear submarines. I did 12 years in the Royal Navy. I then did another 5 years in the Canadian Forces as a diesel boat submariner. After that, I worked in the nuclear power industry as an emergency management consultant. And then I returned to the UK and actually got involved in a charity doing PTSD recovery programs for British veterans post Falklands War. From that, it was a very challenging job, very rewarding, but 3 years as a one-man charity, you've got to pay the bills, regrettably, eventually.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back into the corporate world, joined a gas turbine company, and they moved me back out to the States. So I had North and South America as my patch, moved me back out to the States, and I spent about 10 years developing the small gas turbine product. And then the company reorged, and I eventually moved into one of the global excellence teams and worked at primarily process optimization, major project implementation. And, typically it was reducing non-conformance, increasing NPS scores for underperforming units across the world. So that was the last thing I did in the corporate space. And then I decided to go out on my own about 2 years ago. And my son and I had a marketing agency. So I then expanded the consultancy side. And over the last 18 months, I developed from just the marketing consultancy into more of the whole business growth and eventually to the business selling. And so that's where I've got to today is really looking at helping businesses prepare for sale. And I recently took over the role as a COO of a startup, which is going to be a disruptive force in the additive manufacturing industry. So I have basically retooled my consultancy to go from one-on-one consulting. So I just don't have the bandwidth to do the COO role and do the one-on-one stuff. So I'm now looking at doing group coaching specifically to help business owners present themselves in the best light possible, so they're viable targets for buyouts and business flipping, business sales.
Okay. So running a startup and then helping other people prepare their businesses for sale in a group kind of format. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as you're building that, why did you decide, to work with a startup, right? You've got your consultancy that started in marketing, you guys grew it, and then it became an exit machine for other companies, and
Yep.
then a startup comes along. Why did you decide to do both?
The startup very much sat in my wheelhouse. So I've been a chartered engineer for almost 40 years, and this product is going to completely revolutionize the additive manufacturing industry. We believe that we could completely revitalize American home-based manufacturing with this product. So it was one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that I'd be an absolute mug not to engage with it. So with the product we have, and it's licensed from one of the U.S. Navy development labs, but we believe that we can propel additive manufacturing, 2 generations in the next couple of years. It's a huge product and huge opportunity.
Very cool. Very cool. So as you're doing this, military, a background in military, got a stint in nonprofit as a kind of one man band, and then corporate, and
Yeah.
you did that for a while. Startups and consultancy, right? You have experienced an incredible amount of businesses and business stages and business types. What do you find is your superpower in the place of the business that you enjoy sitting in the most?
Okay. It's really process optimization. Coming from my sort of my nascence as a weapons engineer on nuclear submarines, I was operational right at the back end of the Cold War. We were going under the ice. We were going to places where we probably weren't very welcome to be there. And when you're doing those sort of missions, there is zero margin of error. And the thing is, on a submarine, realistically, anybody on board could do something that would destroy the whole boat or kill everybody. So you have to have total trust in everybody in the crew. You have to make sure that everybody is up for the job. And you have to make sure that you're performing at 100% all day, every day for the 90 days of the patrol. You can't let your foot off the gas when you're dived under the polar ice cap. You've just got to be on your game constantly, 24/7.
Yeah. Super cool. Let's talk about this zero margin of error, right? Let's
Okay.
bring that into the world of business. Running in zero margin of error in the on a nuclear sub absolutely makes sense. When it comes to process improvement that you see in businesses, right? Margin is healthy, right? You want a big margin. You want profit.
Yep.
You want this stuff. What have you learned over here running zero margin of error? Everything has to be precision, precise, or people die. Or versus, what you're bringing to startups and businesses and your consultancy.
Okay. It's interesting. So when we say zero margin of error, we actually used an analogy called the funnel of death. And you imagine something as complicated as a nuclear powered submarine.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be stuff that breaks. As a weapons engineer officer, could have 10-20% of my kit either defective or in a deficient mode at any one time at sea. But the requirement was that we never let the defects accumulate to put us into the point where we would have a catastrophic failure. So we had the analogy of what we call the funnel of death. And at any time you're skirting around the top of the funnel, you've got some defects, they're manageable, you can deal with them. But if you let them slip, every cumulative defect puts you further down into the slope of the funnel. And the more defects that you allow to accumulate, whether they're equipment defects, operational errors, crew fatigue, whatever the limiting factor is, the more that you allow these things to accumulate, the further and further into the funnel you get, and the more likely you are to have a single event cause a catastrophic failure. If you look at the typical entrepreneur's life cycle, so one of the things we teach is what we call the 7 stages of the entrepreneur's journey. Mm-hmm. Every business will flatline at some stage. And we've all been taught about the hockey stick growth process. If you look at the research from McKinsey and Company, they've actually debunked that in the last year or so. They've come out with a new book called Strategy After the Hockey Stick. And what they basically say is businesses focus on trying to generate the next hockey stick growth spurt. It fails, so they the next year they have another strategic plan. They try another hockey stick. It fails, and these accumulation of failed hockey sticks, although on paper they seem to be drifting along flatlining, when you actually look at their performance, one failure after another failure after another failure, the overall performance starts to degrade. So they enter into the point on the life cycle that we call the death curve. So from the flat line, you've got 2 options. You either break out and you go for your high value exit, or you stay where you are and you start to degrade gradually into that death curve. And then from the death curve, you become a legacy company, you become a zombie, and ultimately you end up in that zero value exit, which affects 98% of business owners.
Okay, super interesting. Could you? I'm not familiar with the 7 stages. I haven't heard this before. Could you walk us through the 7 stages of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So the first stage is basically ideation and coming up with your product. And so what we say is, we want you to fail fast at this point. So if you've got a new idea, try and sell 10 of your core product. If you can sell 10, then you've got something the market's telling you it's interested in. And then from the ideation stage, you go into what we call the predictable growth engine. So this is where you systematize your sales and marketing, get you into that initial growth stage. And then the third element is business systematization, because what we typically find is if the company gets it right and they start to get that growth, so they start to get the extra orders in, typically their back-end processes are inadequate to handle the new growth. So they actually become, their business process becomes a bottleneck. And so what we do is we encourage them to implement systems to allow them to handle the increased growth. And also once they systematize, we then consider them to be a scalable company, which will be where we would say that's the first opportunity for the business owner to actually sell, when his company will operate without him there, when he's got the growth engine and he's got the business operating systems. That's when he actually has something to sell. Otherwise, he just has an owner-centric business, which has zero value to a future potential buyer. From the point of scalability, they then enter into that flatline process. And this is where they have to decide, are they going to go for a breakout, or are they going to run the risk of just bouncing along and eventually going into the death spiral, the downward slope. So what we say at this stage, again, the business owner has to make a decision, and we always recommend they go for the breakout. That's how they increase their value, and we try and encourage them to go for a 10x increase in valuation. They need to get serious about their business. So we tell them that the fourth stage of the cycle is what we call the pay-up stage. So we recommend they double their salary. And we do that for two reasons. Firstly, to make them feel like they're successful, because if they go all the way, they're going to have to talk M&As. They're going to have to be making some big decisions. So we want them to feel like a success. We don't want them to feel that they're just making it. We want them to feel like that they're successful. So they're more comfortable having those M&A discussions. But also going through the discipline, saying, okay, if I'm going to double my salary, where's this money going to come from? And it makes them look seriously inside the business for inefficiencies, profit opportunities. There's always golden nuggets hiding in a business that the business owners aren't seeing because they're not looking. So by making them go through the pay-up process, it makes them look seriously inside their own business for the golden nuggets of profit and for the waste, for the non-conformances and the losses that they're living with. So it changes their mindset about how they approach the business. After the pay-up phase, the next thing is we recommend is that they implement an advisory board. Now, this could be something as formal as a board of directors. It could be an informal advisory board, or it could be simply joining a mastermind group. But if they're going to go all the way for the high value exit, they're going to need help. They're going to have to take some big decisions. So they're going to need some help to do that, to go through that decision-making process. Then when they've got their advisory board in place, then the next step is the M&A process. And the way we introduce them to that is we take them through what's called the E to P exercise. So we ask them to identify the top 7 cost lines on their financials, and then look at ways that we can turn those cost centers into profit centers. So for example, if one of your major cost items was digital marketing, would it make sense to buy the agency, bring them into your portfolio, so then it's part of your portfolio. So no longer is it a cost, it's another profit center, and you can then grow that into another potential spin-off down the road. And so at that point, when you go through the E to P exercise, we also recommend they look at their business structure. So do they need to restructure? Do they spin out the intellectual property into a separate company so they can lease out their IP? Do they need to create special project vehicles to go after high value opportunities? So this is all part of the strategic decision making in preparation for that the M&A portion, and then ultimately taking them into the high value exit. And what we like to say is that from being a tribal business, and if you look at small businesses, over 88% of small businesses have less than 20 employees. So they tend to be run on a tribal basis. You can a good leader can run 20 to 25 people without having a lot of formal processes. Above 25 to 30 people, you have to have those corporate processes. So over 88% of small businesses are less than 20 employees. They're running on a tribal owner-centric methodology, which means they're never really going to be viable for a buyout, because as soon as they're bought out and the owner leaves, there actually is no business. So the process there of getting them ready for that buyout, then we take them through to the exit. And what we say is, if you go scalable, you should be able to 4x your valuation from your initial starting point. If you go through all of the protocols we teach for internal optimization, increasing profitability, reducing cost, improving NPS score, that should, if you do it properly, that should be able to be achieved within a couple of years and give you a 10x improvement in valuation. And then beyond that, then you're getting very serious. You're looking at M&A growth. You're looking at not selling a business, but actually creating a consortium or preparing for a roll-up. And that's where you can get the 20x, 30x. But that's a much, much bigger ask. And that's 3 to 5 year sort of project.
So you walk people through. Right now, you're taking the individual tactics and you're applying this to like a group setting. You're creating a boot camp and a group coaching program to help business 10x their valuation. Essentially, the goal is to get to a place to increase your value because one day you're going to sell.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any specific niches or industries or things that work or don't work with your program?
The process is agnostic. I tend to work better in the engineering and technology space, simply the fact that I'm an engineer by training. The sort of businesses that don't really fit well into this process are the ones where it is very, I wouldn't say ego driven, but it's very much personality driven. So the product is the business owner, because it's very difficult to fire yourself when actually your persona is the business itself. So it's got to be something that you can systematize and you can leave behind. So but the tragedy, and the reason I got into this, is when you look at the statistics, 98% of business exits are for close to zero value. They're a fireside sale. The business owner says, I can't do this. I was going to hand it off to my kids. The kids don't want it. I'm just going to lock the door, sell the inventory, and see if I can get some money for the fixtures and fittings, which is a tragedy because they put a huge amount of effort into the business. One of the statistics I saw was 60% of people who start a business have the intention of selling for a high profit to fund their retirement. Mm-hmm. The business owners that have been able to, the 10 years is that sort of magic point. If you can keep your business going for more than 10 years, you've done well. I mean, you've done very well just to keep going for 10 years.
Sure.
But then at that 10-year point, the statistic is that 85% of the net worth of the business owner is in the business. So you've got these people who've been working 10, 20 years, they've built the business, they've given their blood and their life to grow the business, but they don't know what they need to do to be appealing for a sale. They haven't gone through the process of exiting themselves from the business. Mm-hmm. And they also, because this is the other thing that we deal with, is to take the emotion out. We teach them not to work in the business or on the business. I assume you've heard of the Michael Gerber and the E-Myth process.
Yeah.
So he says work on the business. We say, well, actually, you're not going high enough. You need to be working over the business. You need to be looking at your business as a series of interconnected profit and cost centers. And your job in preparing for the sale is to maximize your profit centers. And if you can, turn your cost centers into new profit centers. If you restructure, reorganize, do whatever, and then look over the whole business, how you maximize your exit value based on that premise. And, as I said, 98% of business exits are for close to zero value. It's a tragedy. And the other thing, I mean, you've obviously heard of the great wealth transfer. Mm-hmm. So they say $35 billion of wealth is going to be transferred in the US in the next 5 to 10 years as the boomer generation retire and expire. Yeah. All of that wealth is going to go from that generation to the next generation. When you read actually behind the statistic, $10 trillion of that wealth transfer is in the form of businesses. There's 4.5 million small businesses with a market value of $10 trillion that need to transfer from the boomer who is currently the business owner to whoever's going to take the business owner, who's going to take the business over. If you accept the statistic that 98% of business exits are for near zero value, what that means is in the next 5 to 10 years, over $9 trillion of business value is going to be lost to the economy because the owners don't know how to keep the value in the business going when they exit. It's a tragedy.
Hmm. So a zero valuation, no good, right? That's a fireside sale. That's the fixtures and assets, whatever you have. This is I'm out, and we've got to close this shop. What can I
Absolutely.
get from it?
Exactly. That's exactly what happens. I can't do this anymore. I thought the kids would take it. They wouldn't take it. Or, the market's changed to me. I just don't have the energy to go and do another pivot to catch up with the market space. And they just get tired and they say, okay, just to step back. One of the other problems, especially when it's been a very owner centric business, their perception of their value is typically much higher than the actual value because they have all that emotional investment. So what we teach them is saying, okay, tell me how much you love your business. Tell me how much blood and sweat you've put into your business. Tell me all of these things. Good. We've got that on the table. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, right.
I'm sorry. I'm going to be tough. I don't give a shit. I'm the buyer. I want to see what is the value of this. When you're on the beach in Cancun or the Virgin Islands or wherever, and you're drinking pina coladas, and I'm now left with this, am I going to get any value? Because I know you're not going to come back. Once you take that check and you're off on the beach, you're
Right.
gone. You're gone. And you've got to be tough, because if people come in and say, but I've spent 20 years and my kids were born here, my everything I've done for the last 20 years is in this place, it must be worth more than that. Well, it's not. That's the emotional investment you've made, but that's irrelevant to the future buyer. And you've got to do that tough love to start with to get them to think, okay, so how do I get my business value to where I want it to be to help fund my retirement, to help leave a legacy? So it's tough love to start with. And a lot of people don't like that, but you have to do that. Otherwise, they're going to go in saying, I want all this money, I want all of this value. And the broker or potential buyer says, there's no way I can give you that, because I'm never going to get the return on investment that I'm looking for from this business. So it's a challenge, but until you face reality, you can't move forward.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of these stories, doing interviews over the last 8 years or however long, and I've heard a lot of these stories, and it makes me super sad because that's what I grew up in. I grew up in a construction household,
Yeah.
and my dad was the GC, and if we weren't swinging hammers at the time, we weren't making money,
Yep.
and we had to learn the hard way how to start building assets and things that pay us. But it was brutal to get there. But this whole thing of, I think this is great. This owner centric business, um, a family run business. It's blood, sweat, tears, passion, and how does this go? When you have those tough conversations, I bet it doesn't always end in a happy conversation, right? That's tough love. That's tough.
Yeah.
Tough to hear.
It is tough love, but in some cases, that is the last conversation we have. But the reality is, I can't help somebody if they're living on cloud nine, and until they face reality and say, guys, you think you're worth 20 million, you're not. Here's the statistics. With this level of revenue and this level of margin in your niche, looking at the numbers from 2021, 2022, whatever the EBITDA multiplier is, this is where you should be aiming for. And we teach them, I teach, shorthand, where I said, you've got 4 levels of exit. Level 0 is what we want to avoid. That's the zero value exit.
Yeah.
You can achieve that at any time you want. You just turn the lights off, walk away, and you get nothing. The level 1 exit is when we have systematized. Now, you're not going to get a huge uptick in value, but at least you have something. So the acid test of whether a business is scalable, we say, if you were to go on vacation for 3 months and didn't take your laptop and your cell phone, would the business still be operating in 3 months' time when you went back in the office? If they can honestly answer the answer to that question is yes, then they're scalable. Then they're actually moving away from being owner-centric to actually having a real business. And arguably, you can say if you transition them from an SDE valuation to an EBITDA valuation, you should be able to see a 3 to 4x improvement without any more increase in revenue or profitability. That's just the simple fact that they now have a product which is saleable. Then we go to what we call, sorry.
Hold on one second. Anytime I hear industry acronyms and such, so SDE, seller discretionary earnings, to an EBITDA, and so explain what those are right after you go through the four stages, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you got to come back to the SDE to EBITDA. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So level one is where we say that you have become scalable, but you haven't done any optimization. But at least you have got something you can sell. The level two exit is where we say you focus on all the internal optimizations. How can you find those golden nuggets of profit? How can you reduce your non-conformance? I mean, non-conformance cost is just straight off the bottom line. And so many people just live with it because we've always done it this way. When I was working in the corporate world, I had one group. There were $30 million a year of sales. Their NCC, they were running at about 10% margin. So it's a field service group. The company made the money on the parts. The field service group were really there to facilitate the parts exchange. But at 10% margin, if you're running at 7% non-conformance, you're basically working for free and you're taking on all that extra liability. So by the simple fact of focusing on non-conformance, and we had a 14-month Get Well program. In the end, we reduced their NCCs from 7% down to 3.1%. That added $1.2 million straight back into the bottom line of that work group. And if you look at the margin levels, they would have had to make an extra $12 million worth of sales just to recover that non-conformance cost. So if you can get the non-conformances out of the business, that is immediate profit to the bottom line. And because you're looking at your margin rates, that has a much, much higher impact than actually increasing revenue.
Super interesting. All right. That could probably be a book, an article, because there's depths to what you're sharing there. When does a business move from an SDE to an EBITDA model? Like, because that's when you say at that point you're starting to have a business. Before
Yep.
that, it's an owner centric. You leave for 3 months, lights out, turn the business off, right?
Yep.
Or close to. Talk to us about that. When does that occur? The SDE to EBITDA. What do they mean, and when does that occur? That
Okay.
shift.
So SDE is seller's discretionary earnings, and that's typically where the business owner is just taking money out of the business to fund his lifestyle. So he's not really defined himself as the CEO or as a board member. The business is his piggy bank. He's taking money out. And so when a broker comes, okay, what is the business worth? They will start with what are you taking as draw as the owner, and then see if there's any additions or deductions that they can apply. But as a rule of thumb, just to give you an estimate, if you look at your gross revenue multiplied by your net margin, that gives you a rough estimate of the SDE. That's the starting point for the valuation. And then depending on the revenue, the broker tables will, an SDE valuation will be anywhere from a 1x to a 4x multiplier on the valuation that you get. When you go for an EBITDA, then one of the things is that they can't go for an EBITDA valuation because they can't measure the EBITDA because they've always been just taking draws. So they don't even have the financials in place. So they can say, here are my numbers. This is what we are doing as a professional business. So one of the first things is to actually, if the business doesn't have one, is to get a fractional CFO, get your books cleaned up. So we're always saying you need to present 3 years of good financials, and we need to be showing growth year on year. We need to be showing profits. If there's any anomalies in the growth process, we've got to have a good answer for those. But the idea is, a buyer would be interested if they can see constant growth over 3 years and they can see there's a trajectory which they would reasonably expect to continue. The other things that we talked about is to actually have a standardized sales and marketing process, so what we call the predictable growth engine, that needs to be implemented. And then the business operating system. You have to have those standard SOPs, so when the business owner departs, the business doesn't stop because he's not there. In addition to that, they would be looking at strategic opportunities. So if the business has got some intellectual property that really gives them a strategic edge, that would be something that would be appealing to a potential buyer. The other things we'd be looking at would be locking in key clients. So if you have a client who is strategic to your business, what can you do to lock them in for the long term? One of the criteria we use is the concentration. You should never have more than 40% of your business concentrated in any niche or any single opportunity. And as a rule of thumb, we say never, ever have more than 10% of your revenue from any single client. So looking at the concentration factor is part of that process for professionalizing the business. The other thing is locking in key personnel. If you are going to be leaving, the key managers, the key team members, are they going to stay behind when you've gone? If you need to make that, if you need to keep that in place, you've got to offer them some sort of bonus deal or bonus structure, so they will stay for 12, 24 months after you've exited, so that the new owner has time to bring in his own team and do the transition.
Wow.
And then we're looking at what are their strategic goals. So we talked about the M&A process and restructuring. One of the big ones that I always encourage people, if you've got any sort of software product that you've developed in-house, see if you can turn that into a SaaS product. SaaS products are amazing for business valuation. If you think about it, typically we would be working with a business that's doing 10 to 15% net margin. The goal would be to get them to 20% or better. For an engineering company or any sort of manufacturing, if you can get to 20% net margin, that's great. A SaaS product would be minimum 80% margin. And the multiplier, so again, if you look at where the market is going, in 2021, the EBITDA multiplier for an engineering construction company was 8.22. The market is now hugely biased in favor of the sellers. All the brokers I'm speaking to said, yeah, it's a seller's market. We just can't find enough businesses that are worth us looking at to take to sale because they're owner-centric. They're not prepped for a sale. I looked at the numbers. So again, my specialty is engineering and technology companies. The EBITDA multiplier for Q1 of 2022 has increased to 12.6. So over 1 year, from the 2021 average to the 2022 Q1, there's been a 53% increase in average valuation. So it's definitely a seller's market. But the trouble is, so many business owners don't realize, they have no idea what they need to do to become saleable. So you've got this huge wealth opportunity that's just been squandered.
Super interesting. Yeah, we've been looking at, the seller tsunami, the silver tsunami, the baby boomer transfer, right? And what you're sharing is these businesses, this transfer may just dissolve at
Absolutely.
a zero valuation unless they build an actual business that could move on.
Exactly. And it's huge. I mean, as I said, $10 trillion of business value is going to, it's not going to gradually decline. It's going to evaporate. People struggle getting their head around this. And I say, look, what's talking to a business owner, other than the business, what's the biggest single economic commitment you've made in your lifetime? For most people, it's buying a house. Well, okay, the kids you're paying for the sins of the fathers, but the house, when you buy your house, okay?
Yeah.
You put your life into it, you're paying your mortgage for 10, 20 years, for however long you pay it. When you come to, and you see that as being an asset, because most people say, okay, when the kids are gone, I'm going to be empty nesting, I'm going to downsize, I'll sell the house, I'll buy a smaller property, move down to Florida or move to the lake or wherever I'm going to end up. But the extra value I get is going to help me fund my retirement. That's the mindset. Now, apply that analogy to the business. I've been running this business for 20 years. I've put my heart and soul into the business. I'm going to sell it and live happily ever after. But they don't have a plan to sell. And they sell if they're lucky, they've bought the property. So they'll sell the property. They'll sell some excess inventory. They may be lucky and sell a client list to somebody. They may sell some desks, some fittings, some furniture. But apply that to the house. You've been living in this place for 20 years. You're now ready to do the empty nest and downsize. So does it make any sense? It's okay. The first guy that comes in, I'm going to sell him all my doors. And then the next guy that comes along, I'm going to sell him the windows. And if somebody else comes along, I'll sell him the shingles on the roof. Okay? You're going to get zero value, because you're not selling a home, you're selling stuff. And unless you can sell it as a viable, functioning house, the scrap value or the recovery value for the doors and the windows and the countertops and whatever else you sell is negligible compared to the value of a functioning whole. And if people get that, say, okay, now I get it. But people just, because they've got so much emotional investment, they don't understand the business has to function without them if they're going to release any value.
Now, you said if someone could come in, buy the windows, they could sell the shingles, they said because you're not selling a house, you're selling stuff.
Stuff. You're just selling. You've got to sell it as a functional entity. It's got
Yeah.
to be sold as a, in the business thing, you've got to sell a functioning business.
But I wanted to hear you say that word again.
Stuff. It's just stuff.
It's stuff. I love. You have a great accent, man. That sounded super cool. Then, so that completely makes sense. And I, as we're building our business, right? I'm building businesses to either sell to my kids or sell to other people, right? I'm building this to sell. So think of me as a house, as a component, as a machine, as something that I have to be able to leave, and that's difficult when this is a very customer or owner centric business, the podcast and the media, because it requires this face for now.
Yep.
We're working on that, so I appreciate that. This is sharpening our capabilities as well. So I appreciate your input. Let's do this. We're running out of time, and I want to do a few things. One is if someone wants to connect with you and kind of have you diagnose their business or maybe jump into your group program and learn about how to 10x their valuation, where's a good place for people to connect with you and do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn or just email me directly. I'm always happy to engage through email. So it's just david@steampoweredconsulting.com. We can get chatting away, and I'm always open to help a business owner, think through what they need to do.
steampoweredconsulting.com.
Yep.
Okay, very cool. What we'll do is we'll put that in the show notes below. So if people are running, walking, driving, they can always go back to the show notes and connect directly with you. David, one more thing. As you're doing, this consulting and helping other businesses and doing that, and during this interview, there's probably another question that I should have asked you that maybe I screwed up and I didn't ask you. So one more question. What should I have asked you that I screwed up and did not ask you?
I think that the biggest question is what defines the value that the business owner wants to take? Because we talked about the level 1, 2, 3, or the level 0, 1, 2, 3 exit. The reality is, if you want to go for that really high M&A exit, that's a 3 to 5 year commitment. So, the business owner has to have a sense of reality. If I want to get out quick, I'm just not going to have the time to go all the way through to level 3. So there has to be a reality check. You can either do it cheap, it's the old project management triangle: time, cost, and quality. You can get out quick for a little bit of quality, but not a lot of increased revenue, or you make the commitment 5 years, and it really is a 5-year journey. If you are going to go through the optimization, the M&A process, the business restructuring, creating that high value consortium, and then going for the exit, that's a 5-year commitment. So if you tell me today, I want to be out in a year, but I want to 20x the value of the business, well, sure, yeah, fill your boots. I don't know how you're going to do that, but go for it. Yeah. So there has to be this reality, and a lot of this is just perception management. We all love our business. We put our hearts into it. You talked about you trying to sell your business. You create a business sell. Think about the house, with the puke green walls in the kid's bedroom, and it seemed like a really good time. What was the color in the 70s? Avocado green. Every bathroom was avocado green. Yeah? You've kept it like that because that's where the kids are born. The buyer comes in. What the hell's this? Oh, I'm going to leave it that way because we've got a lot of emotional attachment to puke avocado green bathroom walls. The seller's going to, the buyer, the last thing I want is puke avocado green bathroom fittings. You've got to be willing to meet the seller. And the more you leave your own emotions in the business, the more difficult it's going to be to get that set.
Super cool. Super cool. So, David, great job with this. Are you allowed to talk a little bit about the startup?
Sure.
Okay. So if people want to know a little bit about what you're working on, what's the best way to begin that conversation?
Again, just connect with me through email. So the Steam Power Consulting is perfectly valid.
Okay.
Just to give you a bit of background, additive manufacturing is the wave of the future. There's actually federal government initiatives now to promote additive manufacturing, to reclaim American-based manufacturing. And the beauty of AM is you actually don't need huge amounts of plant. You don't need big, expensive CNC machines. You know, the state of additive manufacturing is getting to the point where even at the sort of the domestic quality printer, you can produce viable products. The company that I've been asked to join actually has what we call an exotic filament. So we have 3D printing filaments that are very, very highly conductive. So for the first time ever, you can print embedded electronic circuits into your additive manufacturing product. So when you think about the Internet of Things, I saw a stat a couple of weeks ago, there's now 1 trillion devices connected through the Internet of Things. Every one of these devices needs a little Wi-Fi antenna to communicate through Wi-Fi to the hub or whatever. So that's 1 trillion antennas that need to be produced. Currently, with where the AM technology is today, to be able to print those sort of things, you're looking at a $500,000 machine. The exotic filament that we're bringing to market is 80 times more conductive than anything that's currently available. So you can now, and you know, our product you can print on a domestic level printer. So if you wanted somebody to start up a business printing, you know, cases with embedded antennas on a $100 or a $500 printer, that is now available. This is going to completely change the whole spectrum of additive manufacturing in the US, and it's going to open up opportunities that for those that are ready, you know, the reason I joined the company was I could say this is actually so disruptive, it can change the whole way we do production. I mean, we're not quite at the Star Trek. If you remember the old Star Trek with Jean-Luc Picard, you know, tea, Earl Grey, black, hot, or whatever he would say. We're not quite there, but we're getting damn close. And you imagine from a military perspective, rather than have to carry one circuit board for every piece of kit in the battlefield, you have a printer, a CD or a thumb drive with 100 circuit designs on. And if a circuit board craps out, you put the thumb drive in and say, print me a replacement. There's your replacement, back in the machine. It's huge, the impact that embedded electronic circuits in additive manufacturing is going to completely disrupt the manufacturing industry in the US.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. Let's do this. As you guys are hitting some milestones with that organization, keep us updated with the Deal Scout, and we want to cheer you on your journey, and for the companies that you're working on, helping them 10x their valuations. Keep on going. That's a really cool mission. I appreciate what you're doing. Fellow audience members, as always, reach out to our guests if what they're saying is interesting to you and you want to get involved. All their contact information will be in the show notes below. Connect with them. Say, hey, heard you on the Deal Scout. Want to do a deal with you. And maybe if you're working on a deal and you want to talk about it here on the show, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show next. Till then, talk to you all on the next episode. Bye, guys.